vacation. It's great to see all of you, and especially it's great to see some of the new faces. So people who I don't know, that means EM is growing, and that's a great sign. Now, if you happen to come late last Sunday, and if you happen to actually join the 1.5 generation service, I will actually be preaching a very similar message. So if that's what happened to you last week, I actually encourage you to maybe go to the 1.5 generation today, since I'll be preaching a different message, okay? Because I'll be preaching a similar message that I preached last week at 1.5 Gen. This is just my strategy to get those of you who actually went to 1.5 Gen, you have to continue to go. No, I'm just kidding, okay? It's actually because I actually talk about my Iraq trip last Sunday, and I want to use this opportunity to share a little bit. So my message today is going to be intertwined with my Iraq trip that just happened. Okay, so let's pray. Father, I pray for this morning. I pray that your Holy Spirit speak to us. Father, I pray that you open our hearts so that we are ready to be comforted, we're ready to be challenged, we're ready to be reminded. And Father, I pray that your word speak to each one of us so that this Sunday there's something, that a word, a phrase, a sentence that speaks into each one of our hearts. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen. So today I want to share we've been talking about the life of David and Saul a little bit. So can we all go to 2 Samuel chapter 1? So today I'll be using 2 Samuel chapter 1 to talk about a title called In Time of Confusion. Now, I read about this recently. It's probably a joke. It says, when I was a kid, I used to pray every night to God to have a new bike, but I never got a new bike. Then as I grow older, I realized God doesn't work this way. So I just stole a bike and asked him for forgiveness, and I got it. It's a joke. Okay. Now, the sad thing is, sometimes this joke actually has some truth to it. Because a lot of times it's hard for us to see what is God doing. Are there times in life that you question it? It's very confusing. You don't know what is God doing in your life. You can't understand what is God's plan. You can't understand what is God doing right now. There are times that you're just very confused because there are times in my life that I just don't see what is God doing. Now, most of you know that I just visited Iraq, and there's a lot of confusion. There are a lot of questions that I don't have answers to. So when we went to Iraq, from our church, not just me, Vicky and Bill also went, and we went with a group of people. So we went there to serve a group of people called the Yazidis. So this is what they look like. Now, most of you probably never heard of Yazidis, or you don't know who Yazidis are. But some of the Yazidis, they actually look very Caucasian. For example, this boy in the middle, if I, sneak him into our junior high here, you probably couldn't even recognize him, right? He looks very, very Caucasian. So a lot of Yazidis, they look Caucasian. Some look more Middle Easterner, but some look very, very white. And Yazidis is a group of religious ethnic minority. And there's actually a lot of them in Iraq, some of them in Iran, some in Syria and Turkey. Now, they speak the Kurdish language. So ethnically, most people think they are Kurdish. Culturally and language-wise, they're very Kurdish. However, all Kurds, they have been converted to Muslim already. But Yazidis, they follow their own religion, which is called Yazidis religion. So what happened in 2014? Now, I don't know how many of you are following the events in 2014. But when ISIS first came, Yazidis were the first group that they targeted. And they targeted Yazidis as a genocide, that they want to kill all the Yazidis. So 2014, just in August of 2014 alone, they're estimated at least 5,000 to 10,000 Yazidis men got killed just in that month when ISIS first started. So a lot of them, they live in Sinjar. This is where they're home, and they had to flee to Sinjar Mountain. So if you have been watching the news, there's people hiding in a mountain away from ISIS. Few of them are Christians, but most of them were Yazidis. And this is a group of people who were hiding in Sinjar Mountain. After 2014, they became refugee. They had to leave their home and abandon their home. Can we watch a short video clip? We're just going to watch a very short part of it. It's always a challenge to watch a video here.
Victims of 72 massacres, mostly at the hands of their Muslim neighbours.
از 2 ساله پیشکفتن نکردیه چون وی مری هرچو او راحت بو لئمایزی مریه.
This living death for the Yazidi community began here in the province of Sinjar, less than 200 kilometres west of Lalesh. In August 2 years ago, ISIS militants surrounded up to 300,000 Yazidis, more than half the entire population. The Peshmerga, the soldiers of the Kurdistan regional government, had deserted them. Knowing their lives were in danger, Khodayda fled with his family into the Sinjar mountains. Up to 50,000 Yazidis were besieged in these mountains, surrounded by militants. They had nowhere to go and were now at the mercy of 50-degree heat. To keep his young children alive, Khodayda gave them milk from a sheep.
معالم بدي هناك اشتهنات كتيبون هناك جبرتشا هناك البروان زنارة نفستيبون بروان سيا نكارين بمشين بيرجين وكالمير جبنين نكارين بشالا بعد مشيان.
As the world watched and nothing was done, around 500 people died from exposure. 3 days into the siege, Yazidi politician Vian Dakhil begged the Iraqi parliament to help. These Yazidis were finally able to escape after 7 days in the mountains.
We'll watch.
With the help of US airstrikes, Kurdish...
Can we go back to the PowerPoint? So this kind of a documentary is a very brief introduction of the Yazidis people. Now, out of the Iraqi parliament, they have 1 seat. So that's why the woman there is begging. Now, notice that she is begging for the Iraqi government to do something in the name of humanity because, remember, most of the Iraqi people are Muslims. And Muslims, they hate Yazidis people, whether you're ISIS or not, because they think Yazidis people worship the devil. So that's why she was begging in the name of humanity, because she's saying, even if we have different religion, you can still help us. By the way, Iraqi government never did, okay? But that's a different story. There's a lot of confusion when we went to Iraq because a lot of questions that we don't have answers. The Yazidis people, they were from Sinjar or Singar, depends on how you pronounce it, and this was their home. In 2014, they had to abandon their home, and they most of them hide in a mountain. Some of them made the exile to Syria or to Turkey, and a lot of them were displaced today in Duhok and Zakho, and those are the two cities that we went this time. Now, it's a time of confusion. When I encounter a lot of Yazidis, they were actually the people who actually were in this very mountain that I talk about. Now, the question is, where is justice? And why does this happen? Do we deserve this? Right? And the other question is, what now? Can we go home? Who can help them? And who are the friends who can help them? Because they still have a lot of friends and relatives in captivity by ISIS. Now, many people have heard, actually a lot of people saying, these refugees, they're just using this opportunity to go to the Western country, to Germany, to US. For part of it, it is true. But if you talk to these Yazidis people, it's very confusing because most of them, they want to go home. They think Sinjar is their home. They miss Sinjar. They want to go home. It's not that they don't want to. But can they go home? This is Sinjar today. And I know this is not fake news, okay? My students who sent me this last week, he and his family, they try to go back to Sinjar, and this is their community as of today. This is a picture that my students sent me. And there's nothing there. There's nothing left in Sinjar. I mean, if it's you, do you want to go home? If that's your home, can you go home, right? Even if they want to. There's no stable electricity, there's no stable water, even if they want to go home. So the confusion is a lot, right? Who can help them? And what now? And where is justice in all this? Now, it's very, very difficult for me to even have answer to any of this question. I went there, I was hoping that at least I have some answer. If people ask me, what do you think about refugee? What do you think about ISIS? And turns out I don't have answer to most of the questions that I had. And it's full of confusion. And the thing is, when I was in Iraq, I thought about, the similar thing in our life. Because our life, maybe not to this extent, but our life is also full of confusion. We also ask these questions. In your life, in my life, we also ask, there are times we also ask, where is justice? Did I deserve this? Why did this happen to me, God? And who can help me? Who is my true friend? And what now? Where do I go from here? We also ask these questions in life, just maybe not to a life and death situation, but we also ask, is my life good news or bad news? Is this something happened? Is that a blessing or is that a curse? And we also ask all these questions about what is God's plan. And a lot of times we have confusion. So with that, let's talk about today's passage. I'm going to start with 1 Samuel before we go to 2 Samuel. So I'm going to start with 1 Samuel chapter 30 first. And I'm going to start with verse 2. So this is 1 Samuel chapter 30, verse 2. And today's projection is in NIV, but you can read whatever version you want. So I'm just going to read the passage. Verse 2, the Philistines were in hot pursuit of Saul and his sons, and they killed his son Jonathan, Abinadab, and Malchi-Shua. It's always a struggle with these names. The fighting grew fierce around Saul, and when the archers overtook him, they wounded him critically. Saul said to his armor-bearer, "Draw your sword and run me through." or these uncircumcised fellows will come and run me through and abuse me. But his armor-bearer was terrified and would not do it. So Saul took his own sword and fell on it. And continuing in verse 5, when the armor-bearer saw that Saul was dead, he too fell on his sword and died with him. So Saul and his 3 sons and his armor-bearer and all his men died together that same day. So basically a lot of people died. All right. This is the final chapter of 1 Samuel. And we saw the king of united Israel die in his final battle. And not only he died, he and his son and a lot of other people. So this is like a eulogy, right? This is the ending of something, and this is a very sad time. But actually, we know in reality we're entering a very confusing time instead. Because Saul's death, is that a good thing or is that a bad thing? Well, it's definitely a sad thing. But is it good or is it bad? It's hard to tell. Is that a good news or is that a bad news? You know, on the surface, it's a bad news that the king of united Israel just died. But we know, actually, King Saul's death means something good eventually in the future. In life, it's very similar. You know, we hear good news, like I said, it's confusing. Sometimes you don't know if it means good or it means bad. For David personally, is this good news or bad news for David personally? Because we know King Saul, he was trying to kill David. David was being pursued and being a fugitive for many, many years because of King Saul. So is this a great news that the person who wants to kill him just died? Now, is this a victory for the Philistines? Is this a good news for the Philistines? Because we know, yes, this may be on the surface, it's a good news for Philistines because they just won a battle. They killed the enemy's king. But we know, from the passage, from the Bible, we know that eventually this is the beginning of the end for the Philistines because King David is about to rise up and defeat the Philistines for good. You see, a lot of times in life, you have all these questions, and it's very, very confusing. And even if you ask the end of Saul's life, if you ask question, is King Saul a complete success or a complete failure? And it's very hard to give an answer. Obviously, it's not very successful, but he's not a complete failure. In fact, the end of 1 Samuel actually ended on a good note that people were missing Saul. People were actually very, very appreciative of what King Saul did. And that's the message the Bible is trying to send on the very, very last sentence or the very last paragraph of 1 Samuel. So you see, our life it's always like in some kind of gray area, right? Maybe it's not a complete success nor a complete failure, but we live in this gray area. We live in this confusion. Let's continue into our passage today in 2 Samuel chapter 1. So after the death of Saul, David returned from striking down the Amalekites and stayed in Ziklag 2 days. On the 3rd day, a man arrived from Saul's camp with his clothes torn and dust on his head. When he came to David, he fell to the ground to pay him honor. "Where have you come from?" David asked him. He answered, "I have escaped from the Israelite camp." So this is where things are happening. So King Saul and Philistine, they had a battle here on Mount Gilboa. And David stayed here in Ziklag. And so this is where David is at right now. So the men actually travel from north to south. So you actually travel about 80 miles. If you travel 80 miles at that time, it's not like, just taking a car to LA, right? You have to run, right? So he must come from certain intention. So let's dive into the intention. And there are 3 things that I want to share today. In a time of confusion, the first point is stay hopeful. If we go back to the passage we just read, there's actually some kind of a code or some type of message the author of the Bible is trying to convey here. The very, very first sentence, it says, after the death of Saul, then the next word it came is David. The author did that almost intentionally. Now, if I can explain that in a way, how many of you love movies? Okay, so most of you like to watch movies. Now, in movies, the director uses this cut a lot. So basically, one of the character, usually not the main character, will say a line like this. He or she will say, I hope someone can do that, or I hope someone can be that person. Then the next scene, the shot is at the main character. It's hinting that this main character will eventually become that person, or eventually will accomplish that task. And the author of the Bible basically using the same technique here. So he's saying after the death of Saul, there is David. So he's telling you there's a future hope here at the death of Saul. And actually, he made it even more obvious. He said there's a man that came from Saul's camp now to David's camp. So it's telling you there's a transition between Saul to David. And the first thing this man, when he sees David, he actually bowed down to David to treat him as a king. He bowed to the ground and paid David honor and brought him the crown, actually. So you see, the author is very intentional telling you there is a future hope that's coming up. Again, is this a bad news that the Israelites were just defeated? Is it a bad news that King Saul just died? But the author is saying underneath it, there is a hope. The end of the era of Saul is actually the beginning of the best king, King David, who is to come. So this Saul to David transition, the author is saying there is hope. And in our life, like I said, we all face confusion. It's like a pendulum or swing between good and bad, between success and failure. But the author is saying, my friend, always stay hopeful, because God has a plan, and there is always hope. When I visited Iraq, like I said, there's a lot of questions, and multiple question marks that I don't have answers to. But if I look carefully, I can see there is hope with these Yazidis people. Yazidis, they were asking all these questions. But now, I'm not saying it's a good thing that ISIS happened to them. It's definitely a very, very injustice. But because of ISIS, their life got changed. Now, was it for good, or was it for better, for worse? Obviously, on the surface, it's for worse. They lost a lot of things. They were forced out of their home, and now they had to live somewhere else and live as refugee. But through this process, there's actually a lot of good things that happen. For example, the Yazidis, they were not very high on education. They don't like written language. They're a spoken language traditional tribe. They don't like written language. But because of this exile, because of this displacement, they started to look at education more importantly. The younger generation, they're eager to learn Arabic. They're eager to learn English. They're eager to learn to receive education. Before, this is a close group of community. And now, they're actually very open to the Westerner. Now, before, you can never go into Yazidis' village and try to share the gospel. This can never happen before 2014, because their village won't welcome you. They don't need anyone. They don't need Westerners. They don't welcome you. But now, when we go there, they actually open arms and welcome each one of us. It's never easier. I mean, you can ask Vicky and Bill. It feels never easier to bond with a group of people. They're so welcoming because they have lost a lot of things, and now they actually open their heart, open their home, and they don't have a village, so they open to you. And for some of them, it is their chance to leave Iraq. Some of them, they've been wanting to leave Iraq, and this is their chance to go to Europe, to go to the United States, or at worst, go to Turkey or Jordan. And this is also a chance of gospel evangelism. Like I said, Yazidi, they're still an unreached people group. Because 3 years ago, you can never go into their village and share the gospel. They never want that. But now, they actually welcome people to share. Even though it's not easy to convert them, but they're very, very welcoming when we go. And even when we share about Jesus Christ, most of the kids, they're very, very open to it. So stay hopeful. Number 2, what I want to share is stay true. So let's continue in verse 4. In verse 4, David asked this messenger, so he said, what happened? Tell me. The men fled from the battle, he replied. Many of them fell and died, and Saul and his son Jonathan are dead. Then David said to the young man who brought him the report, how do you know that Saul and his son Jonathan are dead? So far, everything he says is true. But the next thing he says is very, very perplexing, because we're not sure what's happening. Again, it's very, very confusing. So the next thing happened in verse 6. This young man said, I happen to be on Mount Gilboa. Well, first of all, if you know there's a huge battle there, I don't know if you just happen to be there. Okay, I don't know if that's a tourist place that you want to go visit that day, right? So the young man said there was Saul leaning on his spear with the chariots and their drivers in hot pursuit. When he turned around and saw me, coincidentally, he called me out, and I said, what can I do? He asked me, who are you? An Amalekite, I answered. Then he said to me, stand here by me and kill me. I'm in the throes of death, and I'm still alive. So I stood beside him and killed him, because I knew that after he had fallen, he could not survive. And I took the crown that was on his head and the band on his arm, and I brought them here to my Lord. So this young man, he's saying that, you know what, I did a good thing. I showed mercy to King Saul. I killed him basically to, it's like a euthanizing death. I end his suffering. So, and also, by the way, I brought you the crown and his armband to you for you to enjoy. So you should give me some reward, right? Now, was he telling the truth? Was he telling the truth? Is that what happened? No. Okay, how do you know that's not what happened? Yeah, because that's right. Because the previous chapter that we just read in 1 Samuel 31, that we just read this, right? In the very beginning of today's message, that we just read this. So how did King Saul die? Well, he basically killed himself, right? He asked his armbearer to kill him. He didn't want to. So King Saul committed suicide. So this is an account by the Bible's narrator versus the account by the young Amalekite. Let me ask you, who do you think the Bible intends us to believe in? The Bible's narrator or this young Amalekite? Who should we believe? Who do you think the author of the Bible intends us to believe? Most likely the narrator, right? Which is the account that was in 1 Samuel chapter 31. So most likely we know it's not true. The Amalekite is not telling the truth. He's not telling the truth because he has a hidden agenda. Now, these are his possible hidden agenda, right? Number one, he wants to get some reward for showing grace to King Saul. Number two, and these are not mutually exclusive, probably all of the above, right? Number two, that he knew David was being pursued by King Saul. Saul wants to kill David. So he's saying, I bring you good news. The man who wants to kill you, he's dead now. And number three, I'm bringing you this crown and Saul's armband, which represent a symbol of royalty. So I know you're the next king. Here are your crown and armband. So he has a lot of hidden agenda. Did he really kill Saul? It's hard, maybe not, right? Now, what is David's response here? We don't know if he did or not, okay, for sure. But most likely he didn't. But David's response was clear. Now we have to skip verse 11 and verse 12 and jump to verse 13 and 15. So let's go to verse 13. David said to the young man who brought him the report, "Where are you from?" "I'm the son of foreigner, the Amalekite," he answered. David asked him, "Why weren't you afraid to lift your hand to destroy the Lord's anointed?" Then David called one of his men and said, "Go strike him down." So he struck him down and he died. in verse 16, for David has said to me, your blood be on your own head, your own mouth testify against you when you said, I killed the Lord's anointed. This is actually a kind of an unexpected response from David. He killed this young messenger. Now, did this young messenger deserve the death? It's a very tricky question. Because think about it. David said, I'm going to kill you, or I kill you because you killed King Saul. But let me ask you, did he kill King Saul? Most likely not. Right? It's actually a very interesting situation. Most likely he didn't do it. Most likely he got punished for something he didn't do, but he said he did. So he got punished for his dishonest intent and not for his action. And that's actually something very interesting here. Because the Bible actually presents this case as David was doing the right thing for punishing him. But again, this young man, he was punished for his dishonest intent and not for the things he did. Because most likely he didn't even do it. So this brought us to our second point, which is stay true. Because the message here is clear, at least from David, the message is clear. God is a God who exposes us. God is a God who looks at our heart, and God is a God who looks at our intent. Our dirty mind and our dirty thoughts, we may receive justice for that. And that's actually very consistent in the Bible, even if you didn't do the actual action. Your intent and your thought counts. And this is why he received the punishment. Now we have to understand that we do live in a very dishonest world. In a time of confusion and chaos, however, God is saying, I'm a God of all-knowing, and I'm going to expose you. And you have to stay true. One of the highlights of my trip to Iraq has to do with staying true. So before my trip, I was told that Yazidi people, they're very honorable people. They're very honest. In fact, they're very honest. Even in time of need, they're very honest. But we also have seen that because of lacking of resource, that they can be a little bit different. For example, we give out Skittles as kind of a part of the lesson and also like a gift. And the Skittles that we left at our station or either at the classroom or our headquarters, they keep getting stolen. And at the end, so at first it was we give each one of them a bag, each kid a bag. At the end, sometimes you have to, like 2 or 3 kids share a bag because we ran out because it keeps getting stolen. But you do have to understand, in the whole nation of Iraq, you cannot buy Skittles there. Okay, so keep getting stolen. And also, we give them wristbands as gift. And those also keep stolen. We also pass out water at the end of the day for them to take home. And you see all these kids that they already receive a bottle, but they will hide it. Like these are like 5, 7 years old. They will just hide it behind them and keep wanting to get second or third. Now I understand because I've been to India and this is what happened in India. But it still bothers me because when people are dishonest, it does bother me. Now one of the things that happened is about a pen. When you go on mission trip, you lose a pen every day, almost. So every day, I don't know where do these pens go, but I just continue to lose them. So I was down to my last pen in my backpack, which is this pen. I was so hesitant to use it because this is a multicolor pen. Not only is it from Passion of the Nation, but it's a multicolored pen. It's very handy, right? So because I can, green and red, those are very handy colors. So I was so hesitant to use it, but I had to because I ran through my pen already. And during class, I saw a group of students that were playing with this pen because I've never seen something like this. I had a bad feeling that it's not going to get back to me. And yes, that's true. At the end of the day, I couldn't find my pen anymore. So, I was in my hotel. I was like, man, I thought these are honest people, but they're not. So actually, I grew kind of angry. I was like, oh, man, But the funny thing is, the next day, one of my students, his name is Ziad, what he's holding here is actually my pen. He actually gave back this pen to me, and he said, Mr. Benjamin, I was looking for you yesterday, but I couldn't find you. The first thing he saw me the next day, he gave me back my pen. Now you have to understand, they've never seen this type of pen before. This is actually something very precious to them. And he actually gave it back to me. And it made my day. And this also reminds me and reminds us that, in times of confusion, in times of maybe there's a great need, but still stay true and stay honest. Because in Psalm 51, it says, behold, you desire truth in the innermost being. In the hidden part, you will make me know wisdom. God is a God who looks at our innermost being. So I hope that we stay true. The last thing I want to share is be able to grieve. Now, we live in a generation that we want to suppress people's grieving. And sometimes we suppress ourselves. It's common that we say, I'm okay. Hey, don't worry about it. Things are okay. Because we don't want to cry, and we don't want to cry in front of people. And, I don't want to show my emotion in front of people. And so we deal with things differently. We deal with things with denial and distraction. So a lot of times we get into addiction because that's how we face things that we do not like, is we use distraction, we use denial. And because of that, a lot of times we grow insensitive to people's need inside as well. And we can be good leaders, good pastors, good cell group leaders, but a lot of times, including me, that we're insensitive to people's real need, people's feeling, and people's heart. But David here teaches us something different. So let's go to verse 11, which we skipped earlier. Verse 11, it says, Then David and all the men with them took hold of their cloths and tore them. They mourned and wept and fasted till evening for Saul and his son Jonathan, and for the army of the Lord, and for the nation of Israel, because they have fallen by the sword. Now, Pastor Casey already talked about this eulogy, the lament, what David wrote for King Saul and Jonathan. So I'm not going to repeat that part. But remember earlier, we skipped verse 11 and 12 and jumped to verse 13. So I think that the author of the Bible actually did that intentionally. If you look at the structure of verse 1 to verse 16, it started with the arrival of the Amalekite and ended with the death of the Amalekite. Sandwiched in between are the conversations and questions between David and the young messenger, the young Amalekite. Now, sandwiched in the very, very middle, which is the center part of this passage, is actually verse 11 and 12, which is the reaction, grieving. Again, the author intentionally put it this way because it didn't help the flow of the story. If you have to read the flow of the story, you kind of have to skip verse 11, right? Because most likely it happened later. It happened at the whole day. But David killed the guy immediately. So the flow of the story, actually, you have to skip verse 11 and 12. So the author put verse 11 and 12 in the middle to tell you to be at the centerpiece of this passage to deliver a very important message, which is what? Grieving is important. That's the centerpiece of this passage. And this also sends an important message to us. Now, David, he was grieving, but he actually had all the reason to rejoice. Think about it. David's life was ruined by Saul. Saul wants to kill him. David lost his home. David had to run away from his family, his homeland. He's being a fugitive for many years. He had to, pretend that he lives with, his enemy. All these. And now, someone brings up the news that, hey, Saul is dead. David, not only you're safe, you have a clear path to become the king. Now, if you can imagine this scenario, okay, if you're running an election with someone who has been wanting to kill you, okay, and you guys are in a presidential election, This guy wants to kill you all your life. And all of a sudden, he just died. And not only you're safe now, you just won your election. You can become the president. That calls out celebration, right? Time to celebrate. But David, instead, he actually calls out for grieving. The grief for Saul, Jonathan, God's army, and God's nation. So what David is saying is, basically he's saying, I'm grieving because I see Israel as God's kingdom, and I see people as God's people, and I feel for them. So he grieves for his people, and he grieves for the kingdom of Israel. And that is why God called him the man after God's own heart, because he genuinely cares for people. He genuinely cares and feels people's emotion and people's feeling, and he has compassion. And this is what the Bible has been teaching us, right? Jesus wept, Jesus cries with the people who are crying. And let me share with you one of the things that happened in Iraq. One day that we had devotion, and that morning I wasn't leading the devotion. The other pastor who was leading the devotion, and that morning we read Mark 6, which is Jesus feeding 5,000, and the message, the sentence that spoke to me through that pastor is Jesus said to his disciples, "You give them something to eat." You give them something to eat. And the message that morning was, when you see these Yazidis people, don't just pity them. Actually care for them, have compassion with them, grieve with them, be at the same level with them. And later I understand why God put that message in my heart, because it challenged me. So this is a picture of one of our translators. His name is Farhan. He actually lived in the same hotel room with me. We actually kind of roomed together throughout. And just by looking at what he dresses, just by looking at him, by the way, he's a Yazidi. You probably couldn't tell he's a refugee because he dressed nicely and he's very, very clean. But then after the morning devotion, the next day or the day after the next day, I actually got to visit Farhan's home, and this is where they live. They actually live in tents. They don't even have houses. So all of them, they live in these camps who are made of tents. And if not, if I didn't visit his house, I probably, this is not probably what I would have imagined looking at how he dressed every day. And next to it, this is just across the street from all these tents. This is one of the house that's there, just across the street. Then I realized the same thing here in the States. We live in these nice houses, but maybe just across the street, there may be people who are in real need. So do we have compassion for them, or do we rejoice in what's been good that's happening to me personally? David could celebrate easily with what happened to him personally, but he chose to grieve because he had compassion for other people, for people of Israel, because he felt God's heart. Now, do we also feel God's heart? Do we also grieve about what's happening around us for the people who are in need, whether you know them or you don't? And this is what the Bible challenges us, is a man after God's own heart actually don't celebrate his own personal success, but instead he actually grieves for God's kingdom. So do we grieve for people around us, for our friends' need, for a stranger's need? Do we grieve for people not knowing Jesus Christ? Do we grieve for people who are in actual need? And do we think about these things? And the passage actually ends with grieving again. Verse 17 says, David took up this lament concerning Saul and his son Jonathan, and he ordered that the people of Judah be taught this lament of the bow. So not only David grieved, he taught his whole nation a grieving culture. And sometimes that's what's missing, is we have to also grieve for God's kingdom and people around us. Let's pray. Father, I pray that all my brothers and sisters here, that we all face confusion, we all face questions that we have no answer to, whether it's regarding of this world or regards to us personally. Father, I pray that you help us to stay hopeful, because God, we know that you're always in control, even when it doesn't seem to be the case sometimes. And God, I also pray that you help us to be honest and truthful people. We're people of integrity, even when we're in need. And Father, I also pray that you help us to be people who have compassion, to be people who care about people around us, whether it's friends, relatives, or strangers. And we care about God's kingdom. We care about people's need, and we care about people's salvation. In Jesus' name I proclaim, amen.
Thank you, Pastor Benjamin, for that wonderful message. And I'm just wondering, what is God speaking into our hearts? That through this message, what is God trying to speak to you about personally? Just a little review. In the time of confusion, we have to do what? We have to stay hopeful, right? Because God is a God of hope. It's never hopeless. What's the second thing? Stay true. And what's the third thing? Stay what? Be able to grieve. Yeah, very good. In a little bit, after service ends, we have a little refreshment outside. So for the newcomers, you're very welcome to stay a bit, and we'll just hang out. We'll just fellowship and get to know each other a bit more. Okay? So let us stand to receive the Lord's blessing. The Lord bless you and keep you. The Lord makes his face shine upon you and be gracious to you. The Lord lift up his countenance upon you and give you peace. In the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen. Amen. You're dismissed.